on a cold and silent night, with the streets almost empty and only the sound of the wind cutting through the dark Arnaldo Silva. A police officer was about to face an unexpected encounter after a grueling 12-hour shift. He was exhausted, his body felt heavy, his mind weary from the non-stop hours of work. All he wanted was to get home, take off his uniform, and collapse into bed. The night was quiet, peaceful even, or so it seemed. But life, as it often does, has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Arnaldo's steps echoed through the empty street as he walked, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. Then suddenly he heard something soft, quick steps behind him. He turned around expecting nothing more than a stray animal, or perhaps a person in the distance. But instead there it was a puppy, a small German shepherd, ragged, its ribs visible beneath the dirty fur. The puppy was following him, its eyes filled with a kind of desperation that Arnaldo couldn't ignore. For a moment, he thought it was just another stray looking for food, but the puppy didn't move on. No, it stayed right behind him, determined, as if it had something important to say. Arnaldo, irritated and tired, waved the dog away. "Go away, little pup," he muttered, but the dog didn't budge. Instead, it seemed to plead with its eyes, silently telling him, "Please don't leave me." Little did Arnaldo know, this puppy wasn't just following him, it was leading him to something that would change his life forever. Arnaldo stopped in his tracks, staring at the small creature in front of him. The puppy looked so vulnerable, so small and helpless. He had been on the streets long enough to know what it was like to see strays abandoned, forgotten, and left to fend for themselves. But something about this puppy was different. It wasn't just the desperation in its eyes. There was something more, a certain urgency that Arnaldo couldn't quite place. As the puppy inched closer, Arnaldo couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. He wasn't the kind of man to turn his back on something in need, but after a long shift, he was physically drained. Still, there was something about the way the puppy looked up at him, its large eyes pleading silently. Arnaldo squatted down slowly, his tired muscles protesting. As he did so, he took a closer look at the puppy, noticing the old leather collar around its neck, and then, as if on cue, the dog shifted, moving slightly, so that Arnaldo could see a crumpled piece of paper inside the collar. With trembling hands, Arnaldo gently pulled the note out. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smeared, as if written by someone in distress. He unfolded it carefully, reading aloud to himself, "Help, my brother is sick. No food, no water. 3B. The words hit Arnaldo hard. They burned in his soul. This was no random puppy. It was a messenger carrying an urgent cry for help. Without a second thought, he stood up, determination replacing the weariness he had felt just moments before. He had no idea who had written this, or why, but there was no time to waste. The note had made one thing crystal clear. There was a child in need, and time was running out. The puppy, as if it knew exactly what was at stake, started to run. Arnaldo didn't hesitate for a moment. The exhaustion in his bones was suddenly forgotten as adrenaline kicked in. The puppy led the way, moving swiftly and confidently through the streets, as if it had done this 100 times before. It was a race against time, and the puppy wasn't about to slow down. Arnaldo followed, his heart pounding. The streets grew darker, the buildings more dilapidated. The further they went, the more Arnaldo realized how close they were to something that he had hoped to never see again. The abandoned buildings that had become a symbol of neglect, of people left behind. His instincts told him they were nearing 3B, the address from the note. And then there it was. A large, decaying building stood before them, its windows covered with grime and its entrance barely visible through the overgrown weeds. Arnaldo approached, his breath quick and shallow. Every second that passed felt heavier than the last, the puppy not slowing down for even a moment, led him to the door of 3B. Arnaldo knocked forcefully, but there was no answer without waiting. He pushed the door open, the smell of abandonment filling his nostrils. The room was dark and filthy, the furniture in disarray, and the atmosphere thick with neglect. And then he saw them. A boy no older than 10 was sitting on the floor, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. He was holding something in his arms, something so small, so fragile. Arnaldo's heart sank. It was a baby, a sick baby, barely breathing. Shivering from the cold, the boy's voice cracked as he looked up at Arnaldo. "Is my brother going to die?" he asked, his words full of pain and uncertainty. Arnaldo didn't know how to answer at first. His professional demeanor took over, but beneath that something inside him shifted. The puppy, which had followed them into the room, ran straight to the boy and began licking his face, wagging its tail. It was as though the puppy was trying to comfort him, to break down the wall of fear that separated them. Arnaldo stepped closer, his voice firm but reassuring. "No, I'll make sure he's okay." He didn't know how, but something in him was certain that he would do whatever it took. As the puppy continued to comfort the boy, Arnaldo noticed how the child's expression softened. He didn't look so afraid anymore. For the first time in a long while, Arnaldo felt a sense of purpose, not just as a police officer, but as someone who could make a difference. The puppy wasn't just helping the boy and his sick brother. No, it was helping Arnaldo heal something inside himself that he had buried deep for years. Minutes later, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. Arnaldo stepped aside, allowing the paramedics to enter the room. They rushed to the baby's side, their professionalism taking over as they stabilized him. But as Arnaldo watched the ambulance crew work, he couldn't help but notice the boy, Noah, staring at him with newfound trust in his eyes. "Thank you," Noah whispered, his voice barely audible. Arnaldo smiled, feeling something inside him shift. For the first time in years, he looked down at the puppy who was now wagging its tail, and knew that this small abandoned creature had just saved more than a life. It had saved Arnaldo from his own despair. Noah, for the first time, reached out and petted the puppy's head. It was a simple gesture, but to Arnaldo it meant everything. It was as if, in that moment, they had all found a new sense of hope, a new chance at healing in that quiet, dimly lit room. Everything changed for Arnaldo. What began as a routine night filled with exhaustion and resignation became a powerful moment of transformation. He had gone from being a weary police officer, simply trying to finish his shift, to someone who understood the importance of compassion. Even in the most unlikely circumstances, the puppy, abandoned and desperate, had found its purpose, and in doing so, it helped Arnaldo discover his own through its unyielding determination and unconditional love. The small German shepherd had not only helped save a life, but also healed a deep part of Arnaldo's soul that had been scarred by years of hardship. As the night drew to a close, Arnaldo knew that he would never be the same again. Sometimes it's the smallest and most unexpected encounters that change our lives forever, teaching us that healing comes in many forms, often when we least expect.